I am Lady Rain. This is the Reader's Note, and we are on Section 2, Chapter 9, Part 10. There were sniffles, red eyes, and some sobbing as the Reverend Gooringer, his bald head gleaming mellowly and in a soft variety of colors, courtesy of the summer sunshine following through the stained-glass windows, launched into his funeral eulogy. Following a hymn, a prayer, another hymn, a reading of Ruth's favorite scripture, the Beatitudes. Yes, they're Beatitudes. And yet another hymn. Below him, foaming around the lectern in a semicircle, were great bunches of summer flowers. Even with the upper windows of the church thrown open and a good breeze blowing through, their smell was significantly sweet. Suffocatingly sweet. Suffocatingly sweet. We have come here to praise Ruth McCausland and to celebrate her passing. Gooringer again. Celebrate her passing. The townsfolk sat with hands either folded or gripping handkerchiefs, their eyes most wet, regarded Gooringer with sober, studious attention. They looked healthy, these folks. Their color was good, their skin for the most part unblemished. And even someone who had never been in Haven before could have seen that the congregation here fell naturally into two groups. The outsiders didn't look healthy. They were pale. Their eyes were dazed. Twice during the eulogy, people left hurriedly, dashed around the corner of the church, and were quietly sick. For others, the nausea was a lower complaint. An uneasy rolling in the bowels, not quite serious enough to cause an exit, but simply going on and on. Several outsiders would lose teeth before the day was over. Several developed headaches, which would dissolve almost as soon as they left town. The aspirin finally working, they would surmise. And more than a few of them had the most amazing ideas as they sat in the hard pews and listened to Gooringer preach Ruth McCausland's eulogy. In some cases, these ideas came so suddenly, seemed so huge, so fundamental, that the persons to whom they occurred would feel as if they had been shot in the head. Such persons had to fight down an urge to bolt out of their pews and run into the street screaming Eureka at full volume. The people of Haven saw this happening and were amused. All of a sudden, the apathetic, pudding-like expression on someone's face would be shocked away. The eyes would widen, the mouth flop open, and the Havenites would recognize the expression of a person in the throes of a grand idea. Edward Stampnell, of the Dairy Barracks, for instance, conceived of the nationwide police band on which every cop in the land could communicate. And he saw how a cloak could easily be thrown over such a band. All those nosy civilians with their police band radios would be shit out of luck. Ramifications and modifications poured into his mind faster than he could deal with them. If ideas had been water, he would have drowned. I'm going to be famous for this, he thought feverishly. Reverend Gooringer was forgotten. Andy Rideout, his partner, was forgotten. His dislike of this goofy little town was forgotten. Ruth, forgotten. The idea had swallowed his mind. I'm going to be famous, and I'm going to revolutionize police work in America. Maybe in the whole world. Holy shit. Holy shit. The Havenites who knew Eddie's great idea would be foggy by noon and gone by 3. Smiled and listened, waited. Waited for it to be over so they could get back to their real business. So they could get back to becoming. 11. They rolled down a dirt track, down Road number 5 in Albion, which became Fire Road number 16 here in Haven. Twice logging roads branched off into the woods, and each time one of these came up, Dugan braced himself for an even more bone-wrenching ride. But Hillman didn't take either. He reached Route 9 and swung right. He cranked the Cherokee up to 50 and headed deeper into Haven. Dugan was skittery. He didn't know exactly why. The old man was crazy, of course. The idea that Haven had turned into a nest of snakes was pure paranoia. All the same, Monster felt a steady, pulsing nervousness growing inside of him. It was vague, a low grass fire in his nerves. You keep rubbing your forehead, Hillman said. I've got a headache. It'd ache a lot worse if the wind wasn't blowing, I guess. Another lapse into utter nonsense. What in God's name was he doing here? And why did he feel so goddamn jumpy? Feel like somebody slipped me a couple of sleeping pills. Ah, yeah. Dugan looked at him. But you don't feel it that way, do you? You're as cool as a goddamn cucumber. Oh, I'm scared. But I don't have the jitters. And I don't have a headache, neither. Why would you have a headache? Dugan asked crossly. The conversation had gotten decisively Alice in Wonderlandish. Headaches aren't catching. If you and 6 other guys are painting in a closed room, you are all apt to end up with headaches. Ain't that a true fact? Yeah, I guess so, but this is... No, it ain't. And we got lucky with the weather. Just the same, I guess that thing is putting on a powerful stink, because you feel it. I can see you do. Hillman paused and then said another Alice in Wonderland thing. Had any ideas yet, Trooper? What do you mean? Hillman nodded, satisfied. Good. If you do, tell me. I got something in that sack for you. This is crazy, Dugan said. His voice was quite steady. Wasn't quite steady. I mean, utterly nuts. Turn this thing around, Hillman. I want to go back. Ev suddenly focused a single phrase in his mind, as sharply and as clearly as he could. He knew from his last 3 days in Haven, that Bryant, Marie, Hilly, and David were routinely reading each other's minds. He could sense it even though he couldn't pick it up. By the same token, he had come to realize they couldn't get into his head unless he let them. Again, got to put this up. He had begun to wonder if it had something to do with the steel in his skull, a souvenir of that German grenade. He had seen the potato masher with dreadful, ineluctable clarity, a gray-black thing spinning in the snow. He thought, well, I'm dead. That's it for sure. After, he remembered nothing until he'd awakened in the French hospital. He remembered how his head had hurt. He remembered the nurse who had kissed him, and how her breath had smelled like anise, and how she kept saying, shaping her words as if speaking to a very small child, Je t'aime, amour. La guerre est finie. Je t'aime, reste nous. La guerre est finie. La guerre est finie. He thought now. La guerre est finie. What is it? He asked Dugan sharply. What do you mean? Ev swerved the Cherokee over to the side of the road, kicking up a spume of dust. They were a mile and a half over the town line now. It was another 3 or 4 miles to the old Garrick farm. Don't think. Don't talk. Just tell me what I was thinking. At fini. You're thinking, the grew at fini. But you're crazy. People can't read minds. They can't. Dugan stopped. Okay. Ooh. Dugan stopped. He turned his head slowly and stared at Ev. Ev could hear the tendons in his neck creak, in the man's neck creak. His eyes were huge. La guerre est finie, he whispered. That's what you were thinking. And that she smelled like licorice. Anise, Ev said, and smiled. Her thighs had been white, her cunt so tight. And I saw a grenade in the snow. Oh, Jesus, what's going on? Ev pictured a red, old-fashioned tractor in his mind. What now? Tractor? Dugan husked. Farmel? But you got the wrong tires on it. My dad had a Farmel. Those are Dixie Field Boss tires. They wouldn't fit a Dugan suddenly turned around, grappled for the Cherokee's door handle, leaned out, and threw up. Well, Ruth once asked me if I would read the Beatitudes at her funeral, if it should fall to me to preside over it. The Reverend Gouringer was saying, in a mellow Methodist voice, the Reverend Donald Hartley would have completely approved of. And I have honored her wishes, yet I grew, or thinking, grew as Gouringer paused, a little expression of surprise and concern touching his face. A close observer might have thought a little gas had bubbled up, and he had paused to stifle an unseemly burp. I think there is another set of verses she merits. Tractor, Farmel tractor. There was another small hitch in Gouringer's delivery, and that frown touched his face again. Are not the sort of verses, I suppose, that any Christian woman would dare to ask for, knowing that a Christian woman must earn them. Listen as I read from the book of Proverbs, and see if you, who knew her, do not agree that this is the case with Ruth Goslin. Those are Dixie Field Boss tires. Dick Allison glanced to his left and caught Newt's eye across the aisle. Newt looked dismayed. John Hartley's mouth had dropped open. His faded blue eyes shifted back and forth in bewilderment. Gouringer found his place. What child? What is it? Found his place, lost it, almost dropped his Bible. Suddenly he was flustered, no longer the master of ceremonies, but a divinity student with stage fright. As it happened, no one noticed. The outsiders were occupied either with physical distress or with mind-boggling ideas. The people of Haven drew together as an alarm went off, jumping from one mind to the next until their heads rang with it. This was a new carillon. Carillon. One that jangled with discord. Someone's looking where they have no business. Bobbi Tremaine took Stephanie Colson's hand, squeezed it. She squeezed back, looking at him with wide brown eyes. The alarmed eyes of a doe who hears the slide and click of a bolt in a hunter's gun. Out on Route 9, close to the ship. One's a cop. Cop, yes. A special cop. Ruth's cop. He loved. Ruth would have known these rising voices. And now, even some of the outsiders began to feel them, although they were relatively new to Haven's infection. A few of them looked around like people coming out of thin dozes. One of these was a lady friend of Representative Brennan's aide. She had been miles from here, it seemed. She was a minor bureaucrat in Washington, but she had just conceived of the filing system that might well get her a fat promotion. Then a random thought, a thought she would have sworn was not her own. Somebody got to stop them quick. Flashed across her mind, and she looked around to see if someone had actually called out aloud in the church. But it was quiet except for the preacher, who had found his place again. She looked at Marty, but Marty was sitting with a glassy gaze, looking at one of the stained glass windows. I get the hiccups now. Ooh. With a fixed gaze of one deeply hypnotized. She supposed this to be boredom and went back to her own thoughts. Who can find a virtuous woman? Guringer read, his voice a trifle uneven. He hesitated in the wrong places and stumbled a few times. For her price is far above rubies. The heart of her husband doth safely trust in her, and he shall have no luck of gain. She doeth him good, and not evil, all the days of her life. She seeketh wool. Now another burst of those alien thoughts came to a single sensitized ear in the church. Sorry about that. I just couldn't. What? Holy Christ, that's Wheeling. How? There are two voices speaking, but we are only hearing one. The mind, Nat thought, and eyes began to focus on Bobbi. There was only one person in Haven who could make his mind a peck to them. That person wasn't here now. Two voices. The one we don't hear, the voice of the drunken friend. Bobbi got up suddenly and worked her way along the pew, horribly aware that people were looking at her. Guringer, the ass, had paused again. "Excuse me," Bobbi muttered. "Excuse me, excuse me." At last she escaped into the vestibule and the street. Others, Bobby, Tremaine, Newt, Dick, and Bryant Brown among them, began to follow. None of the outsiders noticed. They had lapsed back into their strange dreams. 13. "Sorry about that," Butch Dugan said. He pulled the door closed, got a handkerchief out of his back pocket, and began to rub his mouth. "I couldn't seem to help it. I feel better now." Ev nodded. "I ain't going to explain. There isn't time. But I want you to listen to something." "What?" Ev snapped on the Cherokee's radio and dialed across the band. Dugan started. He had never heard so many stations, not even at night when they jumped all over each other, waving in and out in a sea of voices. Thing wavery about these. Most were bell clear. "Hey, excuse you. Excuse you. Hey, I'm talking to you, Miss Thing." "Don't you dare. I am reading. Don't need to growl." Ev stopped at a C&W station. A song by the Judds was just ending, and when it did, there was a station ID. Butch Dugan could hardly believe what he was hearing. Double A, VA. A perky girl group sang, to the astonishment of fiddles and banjos. "Holy Christ, that's Wheeling," Dugan cried. "How?" F snapped off the radio. "Now I want you to listen to my head." Dugan stared at him for a moment, utterly flummoxed. Not even Alice in Wonderland had been this mad. "What in the name of God are you talking about? Don't argue with me, just do it." Ev turned his face away from Dugan, presenting him with the back of his head. "I got 2 pieces of steel plate in my head. War souvenir. Bigger ones back there. See the place where the hair don't grow? Yes, but time is short. Put your ear up close to that scar and listen." He did, and felt unreality wash over him. The back of the old man's head was playing music. It was teeny and distant, but perfectly identifiable. It was Frank Sinatra singing New York, New York. Butch Dugan began to giggle. Soon he was laughing. Then he was roaring, arms wrapped around his stomach. He was out here in the back of the beyond with an old man whose head was just turned into a music box. By God, this is better than Ripley's Believe It or Not, which laughed and gasped and wept and roared, and the old man's calloused palm slammed across his face. The shock of being slapped like a small child surprised Butch out of his hysteria as much as the pain had done. He blinked at Ev, one hand going to his cheek. It started a week and a half before I left town, Ev said grimly. Blasts of music in my head. They were stronger when I got out this way. And I should have thought about that before now, but I didn't. They're stronger now. Everything is. So I got no time for you to get the screaming yeehaws. Screaming yahaws. Are you going to be all right? The flush spreading over Dugan's face mostly hid the red mark Ev's hand had made. Screaming yahaws. That pretty well described it. First he had puked, and then he had a fit of hysterics like a teenage girl. This old man isn't just showing him up. He's pulling past him in second gear. I'll be fine, he said. You believe now that something's going on here? That something in Haven has changed? Yes, he swallowed. Yes, he repeated. Good. F stepped on the gas and roared back onto the road. This thing, it's changed everyone in town. Trooper Dugan, everyone but me. I get music in my head, but that's all. I don't read minds, and I don't get ideas. What do you mean, ideas? What kind of ideas? All kinds. Cherokee speedometer touched 60, then began to edge past it. Thing is, I have no proof of what's going on. None at all. You thought I was right off in my head, didn't you? Dugan nodded. He was holding on tight to the dashboard in front of him. He felt sick to his stomach again. The sun was too bright, dazzling on the windshield and the chrome. The reporter and the nurses did too. But there's something in the woods, and I'm going to find it. And I'm going to take some pictures of it, and I'm going to take you out, and we're going to do some loud talking, and maybe we'll find a way to get my grandson David back. Maybe we won't. But either way, we ought to be able to shut down whatever's going on here before it's too late. Out to, he caught to. Now the speedometer needle hung just below 70. How far, Dugan managed through his closed teeth. He was going to puke again and soon. He just hoped he could hold on until they got to wherever they were going. The old Garrick farm? Ev said. Less than a mile. Thank God, Dugan thought. 14. It's not guard, Bobbi said. Guard's passed out on the porch of the house. How do you know? Adlai McKing asked. You can't read him. I can, though, Bobbi said. A little more every day. He's still on the porch, I tell you. He's dreaming about skiing. They looked at Bobbi silently for a moment, about a dozen men standing across the street from the Methodist church, in front of the Haven lunch. Who is it, then? Joe Summerfield asked at last. I don't know, Bobbi said. Only that it's not guard. Bobbi was swaying mildly on her feet. Her face was that of a woman who was 50, not 37. There were brown circles of exhaustion under her eyes. The men seemed not to notice. From the church, voices were raised in Holy, holy, we adore thee. I know who it is, Dick Ellison said, suddenly. His eyes had gone strange and dull with hate. Only one other person it could be. Only one other person I know of in town with metal in his head. Ev Hillman, Newt cried. Christ. We gotta get moving, Judd Tarkenton said. The bastards are getting close. Adlai, get some guns from the hardware store. Okay. Get 'em, but don't use 'em, Bobbi said. Her eyes swept the men. Not on Hillman, if it's him, and not on the cop. Particularly not on the cop. We can't afford another mess in Haven, not before becoming. It's all finished. I'll get my tube, Beach said. His face was vacant with eagerness. Bobbi grabbed his shoulder. No, you won't, she said. No more messes includes no more cops disappearing. She looked at them. I don't know. I don't know. I didn't have it, so I don't know. That I'm reading. Yep. She looked at them all again, then at Dick Ellison, who nodded. Hillman's got to disappear, he said. No way around it. But that's maybe all right. Ev's crazy. A crazy old man might decide to do just about anything. A crazy old man might just decide to haul stakes and drive off to Zion, Utah, or Grand Forks, Idaho, to wait for the end of the world. The cop's going to make a mess, but he's going to do it in Derry, and it's going to be a mess everyone understands. No one else is going to shit in our nest. Go on, Judd. Get the guns. Bobby, you pull the back of the lunch with your pickup truck. Oh, you pull in back of the lunch. With your pickup truck. Newt, Adley, Joe, you ride with me. You go with Bobby, Judd. Rest of you and Kyle's caddy. Come on. I'll see a freight. They got moving. 15. Shush. Oh, sush. Same old dreams. Few new wrinkles. Damn strange ones. The snow had gone pink. It was soaked with blood. Was it coming from him? Holy hell. Who would have believed how much blood the old tosspot had in him? They were skiing the intermediate slope. He knows that he should have stayed on the beginner slopes for at least one more session. This is too fast for him, and furthermore, all this bloody snow is very distracting, particularly when it's all your blood. Now he looks up, sending a rip of pain through his head, and his eyes widen. There's a Jeep on the goddamn slope. Anne-Marie screams, "Stand, Bobby, guard! Stand, Bobby!" But he doesn't need to stand Bobby, because this is just a dream. It's become an old friend in the last few weeks, like an erratic burst of music in his head. There's a dream, and that isn't a Jeep. And this isn't a straight arrow slope. It's turning into Bobby's driveway. Is it a dream, or is it real? No, he realized. That was the wrong question. A better question would have been, how much of this is real? The chrome winked blinding arrows of light into Gardner's eyes. He winced and groped for peepholes. No, not a dream. It's summer. You're in Haven. The porch railing. He could remember almost everything. It was hazy, but he could remember. No blackouts, since he had come back to Bobby's. Music is in his head, but no blackouts. Bobby had gone to a funeral. Later on, she'd come back, and they would start digging again. He remembered it all. Just as he remembered the town hall clock tower lifting off into the afternoon sky like a big-ass bird. All present and accounted for, sir, except this. He stood with his hands on the railing, bleary, bloodshot eyes, watching the Jeep in spite of the glare. He was aware that he must look like a refugee from the Bowery. Thank God there's still some truth in advertising. That's what I feel like. Then the man in the passenger seat turned his head and saw Guard. The man was so huge that he looked like a creature from a fairy tale. He was wearing sunglasses, so Guard couldn't tell for sure if their eyes actually met or not. He thought they did. Felt that way. It felt that way. Either way, it didn't matter. He knew the look. As a veteran of 100 picket lines, he knew it well. He also knew it as a drunk who had awakened in the tank on more than one occasion. The Dallas police had arrived at last, he thought. Thought carried feelings of anger and regret. But what he felt most was relief. At least for a moment. He's a cop. But what's he doing in a Jeep? God, the size of his face? He's as big as a fucking house. Must be a dream. Must be. The Jeep didn't stop. It rolled up the driveway, not a sight. Now Gardner could only hear its roaring motor. Headed out back, going up there in the woods. They knew all right. Oh Christ, if the government gets it. All of his earlier dismay rose in him like bile. His dazed relief blew away like smoke. He saw Ted the Power Man throwing his jacket over the littered remains of the Leviathan machine, saying, What gadget? Dismay was replaced by the old, sick fury. Hey, Bobby, get your ass out here, he shrieked in his mind as loudly and clearly as he could. Fresh blood burst from his nose, and he staggered weakly back, grimacing in disgust, and groping for his handkerchief. What does it matter anyway? Let him have it. It's the devil on either hand, and you know it. So, what if the Dallas police get it? Turning Bobby and everyone in town into Dallas police, particularly her company, the ones she brings out late at night when she thinks I'm asleep, the ones she takes into the shed. This had happened twice, both times around 3 a.m. Bobby thought Gardner was sleeping heavily, a combination of hard work, too much booze, and Valium. The level of pills in the Valium bottle were going steadily down. That was true, but not because Gardner was swallowing them. Each night pill was actually going down the toilet. Why this stealth? He didn't know, any more than he knew why he had lied to Bobby about what he had seen on Sunday afternoon. Flushing a Valium tablet every night wasn't really lying because Bobby hadn't asked him outright if he was taking them. She had simply looked at the decreasing level of the tablets and drawn an erroneous conclusion Gardner hadn't bothered to correct. Just as he had not bothered to correct her idea that he was sleeping heavily. In fact, he had been plagued by insomnia. The amount of drink seemed to put him under for long. No amount of drink seemed to put him under for long. The result was a kind of constant, muddled consciousness across which thin gray veils of sleep were sometimes drawn, like unwashed stockings. The first time he had seen lights splash across the wall of the guest room in the early hours of the morning, he had looked out to see a large Cadillac pulling into the driveway. He had looked at his watch and thought, must be the mafia. Who else would show up at a farm way out in the woods in a caddy at 3 a.m? But when the porch light went on, he had seen the vanity plate, pile 1, and doubted if even the mafia went for vanity plates. Bobby had joined the 4 men and 1 woman who had gotten out. Bobby was dressed but barefoot. Gardner knew 2 of the men, Dick Allison, head of the local volunteer fire department, and Kyle Arkenberg, a local realtor, who drove a fat-ass Cadillac. The 2 others were vaguely familiar. The woman was Hazel McCready. After a few moments, Bobby had led them to her back shed, the one with the big Craig lock on the door. Gardner thought, maybe I ought to go out there, see what's going on. Instead, he lain down again. He didn't want to go near the shed. He was afraid of it, of what might be in there. He had dozed off again. The next morning there had been no caddy, no sign of Bobby's company. Bobby had in fact seemed more cheerful, more her old self in the morning than at any time since Gardner had returned. He had convinced himself it was a dream, or perhaps something, not the DTs exactly, but close, that had crawled out of a bottle. Then, not 4 nights ago, Kyle 1 had arrived again. Those same people had gotten out, met Bobby, and gone around to the shed. Guard collapsed into Bobby's rocking chair and felt for the bottle of scotch he had brought out here this morning. The bottle was there. Gardner raised it slowly, drank, and felt liquid fire hit his belly and spread. The sound of the Jeep was fading now, like something in a dream. Perhaps that was all it had been. Everything seemed that way now. What was the line in the Paul Simon song? Michigan seems like a dream to me now. Yes, sir. Michigan, weird ships buried in the ground, cheap Cherokees, Cadillacs in the middle of the night. Drink enough, and it all faded into a dream. Except it's no dream. They're the take charge people, those people who come into the Cadillac with the Kyle 1 plates. Just like the Dallas police. Just like good old Ted with his reactors. What kind of shot are you giving them, Bobby? How are you souping them up even more than the rest of the resident geniuses? The old Bobby wouldn't have pulled that kind of shit. But the new improved Bobby does. And what's the answer to all of this? Is there one? Devils on every side, Gardner cried out grandly. He slugged back the last of the scotch and threw the bottle over the porch railing and into the bushes. Devils on every side, he repeated. Passed out. Trying to warm my toesies. 16. That guy saw us, Butch said as the jeep pulled across the Andersons' garden on a diagonal, knocking over huge corn stalks and sunflowers that towered high over the Cherokee's roof. I don't care, Ev said, wrestling the wheel. They emerged from the garden on the far side. The Cherokee's wheels rolled over a number of pumpkins that were coming to full growth amazingly early. Their hides were strangely pale, and when they burst, they disclosed unpleasant, fleshy pink interiors. If they don't know we're in town by now, then I'm wrong about everything. Look, didn't I tell you? A wide, rutted track wound into the woods. Ev bounced onto it. There was blood on his face. Dugan swallowed. It was hard. His head ached very badly now, and all the fillings in his teeth seemed to be vibrating very fast. His guts were churning again, and his shirt looked like somebody popped him one in the... Pull over, I'm going to be sick again. Ev jammed on the brakes. Dugan opened the door, leaned out, vomited a thin yellow stream onto the dirt, and then closed his eyes for a moment. The world was swooping and turning. Voices rustled in his head. Great many voices. Guard saw them. He's yelling for help. How many? 2. 2 in a Cherokee. They were headed... Look, Butch heard himself say, as if from a great distance. I don't want to spoil the party, but I'm sick, seriously sick. Thought you might be. His voice came down a long, echoing hall. Somehow Butch managed to haul himself up again into the passenger seat, but he didn't even have strength enough to pull the door closed. He felt as weak as a new kitten. You ain't had time to build up any resistance, and we're right where it's strongest. Hold on, I got something that'll fix you up. At least I think I do. Ev pushed the switch that lowered the Cherokee's electric rear window. Got out, lowered the tailgate, pulled out the gunny sack. He dragged it back to the Jeep and then hoisted it onto the seat. He glanced at Dugan and didn't like what he saw. The trooper's face was the color of candle wax. His eyes were shut, the lids purplish. His mouth was half open, and he was breathing in quick, shallow gasps. I found a moment to wonder how whatever it could be doing that to Dugan when he himself felt nothing, absolutely nothing. Hang on, friend, he said, and used his pocket knife to cut the rope holding the neck of the bag. Thick, Dugan wheezed, a wretched brown fluid. Ev saw that there was 3 teeth in the mess. He got out a light plastic oxygen supply tank, where the clerk at Maine Med Supplies had called a flat pack. He stripped the gold foil circle from the end of the hose leading out of the flat pack, revealing a stainless steel female connector. Now he brought out a gold-colored plastic cup, the sort jetliners came equipped with. A segmented white plastic tube was attached to this. At the end, there was a white plastic male connector, a valve. This don't work the way that guy said it would. I do believe this big fella's going to die on me. He slammed the male connector of the mask onto the female connector on the oxygen supply. Violent intercourse, which he hoped would result in keeping Dugan going. He heard oxygen sighing gently inside the gold cup. All right, so far so good. He leaned over to put the cup over Dugan's mouth and nose, using the electric straps. Then he waited anxiously to see what would happen. If Dugan didn't come out of this tailspin in 30 or 40 seconds, he would haul ass. David was missing and Hilly was sick, but neither thing gave him the right to murder Dugan, who hadn't known what sort of mess he was getting into. 20 seconds passed, then 30. Ev dropped the Cherokee into reverse, meaning to turn around on the edge of the Andersons' garden when Dugan gasped, jerked, and opened his eyes. They looked very wide and blue and bewildered above the rim of the gold cup. Some color had come back into his cheeks. What the hell? His hands groped for the cup. Leave it on, Ev said, putting one of his big arthritic old hands over one of Butch's. It was the outside air poisoning you. You in a hurry for another dose? Butch stopped reaching for the cup. It bobbed on his face as he said, How long will this stuff last? 25 minutes or so, the guy said. It's a damn valve. It's a damn demand valve, though. Every now and then you can pull it down. When you start feeling woozy again, you put it back on. I want to go on in, if you think you can. It can't be far, and I feel like I gotta know. Which Dugan nodded. Cherokee lurched forward again. Dugan stared. Excuse me. Stared out at the woods around them, silent. No birds, no animals, no nothing. This was very wrong. Very bad. Very damned wrong. Faintly, far back in his mind, he could hear thoughts like a whisper of shortwave transmissions. He looked at Ev. What the blue fuck is going on here anyway? That's to find out. Without taking his eyes off the rough track, Ev rummaged in the sack. Dugan winced at the Cherokee's undercarriage, screamed over a stump sawed off a little higher than the others. Ev brought out a big .45. It looked old enough for its original owner to have carried it in World War I. Yours? Dugan asked. It was amazing how fast the oxygen was bringing him around. Yeah, they teach you to use these things, don't they? Yes. Although the one Hillman had looked like an antique. You might have to use it today, Ev said and handed it over. What? Have a care, it's loaded. Up ahead, the land suddenly sloped downward. Through the trees came a giant reflection. Sunshine bounced off a huge metal object. Ev stamped the brake, suddenly terrified to the depths of his heart. What the hell? He heard Dugan mutter beside him. Ev opened the door and got out. As his feet touched the ground, he became aware that the ground was crisscrossed, small, dusty cracks, and that it was vibrating very rapidly. At the next moment, music so loud that it was deafening blew through his head with gale force. It went on for perhaps 30 seconds. The pain was excruciating, and it seemed forever. At last, it simply winked out. He saw Dugan standing in front of the Cherokee, the cup now hooked under his chin. He held the flat pack by the strap in one hand, .45 in the other. He was looking at Ev apprehensively. I'm all right, Ev said. Yeah, your nose is bleeding. Just like the guy back at the farm we passed. Ev wiped his nose with his finger and looked at the smear of blood. He wiped his finger on his pants and nodded toward Dugan. Remember to put the mask back on when you start to feel woozy. Oh, don't worry. Ev leaned back into the Cherokee and rummaged in his bag of tricks again. He brought out a Kodak disc camera and something that looked like a cross between a pistol and a blow dryer. Flare gun? Dugan asked, smiling a little. Yeah. Get on the gas again, trooper. You're losing your color. Dugan pulled it up. The two men started toward that glittering thing in the woods. 50 feet from the Cherokee, Ev stopped. It was more than huge. It was titanic. a thing that would perhaps be large enough to dwarf the ocean liner when completely uncovered. "Give me your hand," he said roughly to Dugan. Dugan did as he asked, and wanted to know why. "Because I'm scared shitless," Ev said. Dugan squeezed his hand. Ev's arthritis flared, and he squeezed back anyway. After a moment, the two men started forward again. How many sections are there? Oh, we got quite a ways. Good. 17. Bobbi and Judd got the guns from the hardware store and put them in the back of the pickup. The side trip hadn't taken long, but Dick and the others had gotten a good start, and Bobbi pushed the pickup as far as she dared to catch up. The truck's shadow, shortening as the day approached noon, ran beside them. Bobbi suddenly stiffened a little behind the wheel. "Did you hear it?" "Heard something," Judd said. "Is it your friend?" "It was your friend, wasn't it?" Bobbi nodded. "Guard saw them. He's yelling for help." "How many?" "2, in a jeep. They were headed out to where the ship is." Judd brought his fist down on his leg. "The fuckers. The dirty snooping fuckers." "We'll catch 'em," Bobbi said. "Don't worry." They were at the farm 15 minutes later. Bobbi pulled her truck in behind Allison's Nova. I got an itch on my nose. And Arkenberg's Cadillac. They looked at the group of men. She looked at the group of men and thought how much like the knights they had met out here this was, the ones who were to be made to become first, especially strong. But Hazel wasn't there, and Beach was. Joe Summerfield and Adley McKean had never been inside the shed either. "Get the guns," she told Judd. "Joe, you help. Remember, no shooting unless you have to. Don't shoot the cop no matter what." She looked toward the porch and saw a guard lying on his back. Guard's mouth was open, and he was breathing in slow, rusty snores. Bobbi's eyes softened. There were plenty of people in Haven, Dick Allison and Newt Barringer, probably chief among them, who thought she should long since have gotten rid of Guard. Nothing had been said out loud, but in Haven, you no longer had to say things out loud. Bobbi knew if she put a bullet through Guard's head, there would be a whole platoon of willing workers out here an hour later to help bury him. They didn't like Guard because the plate in his head made him immune to the becoming, and it made him hard to read. But he was her break. And even that was crap. The truth was simpler yet. She still loved him. She was still human enough for that. And they would all have to admit that, drunk or not. When they had needed a warning, Guard had given it. Judd and Joe Summerfield came back with the rifles. There were 6 of them, varied calibers. Bobbi saw the 5 went to people she could trust completely. She gave the 6th, the 22 to Beach, who would complain if he didn't get a shooting iron. Occupied with the ritual of guns, none of them saw that Gardner had half opened his bloodshot eyes and was looking at them. No one heard his thoughts. He had learned how to seal them off. "Let's go," Bobbi said. "And remember, I want that cop." They moved out in a group. 18. Ev and Butch stood well back from the edge of what was now a ragged slash running better than 300 yards from right to left and yawning 60 feet across at its widest point. Anderson's old mongrel of a truck stood off to one side, looking tired and used. Next to it was a souped-up hay loader with its giant screwdriver snout. There were other tools in the lean-to of peeled logs. Ev saw a chain fall on one side, a chipper on the other. There was a big pile of sodden sawdust below the mouth of the chipper's exhaust vent. There were cans of gasoline in the lean-to, and a black drum labeled diesel. When Ev had first heard these noises in the woods, he had thought New England paper Must be doing some logging. But this was no logging operation. This was an excavation. That monstrous dish, glittering in the sun. The eye could not stay away. It was drawn back again and again. Gardner and Bobbi had removed a little more hillside. 90 feet of polished silver-gray metal now jutted out of the earth and into the green-gold sunlight. If they had looked into the slash, they would have seen another 40 feet or better. Neither of them went close enough to look. Holy Jesus, Dugan said. The gold cup bobbed on his face, and above its rim, his blue eyes bulged. Holy Jesus, it's a spaceship. Is it ours, or is it Russian, do you think? Holy Jesus Christ. It's as big as the Queen Mary. That ain't Russian. That ain't. He fell silent again. In spite of the oxygen, his headache was coming back. Ev raised the disc camera and clicked off 7 shots as fast as his finger could push the camera's button. Then he moved 20 feet to the left and took another 5, standing by the chipper. Move to the right, he said to Dugan. Huh? You're right. I want you in these last 3 for perspective. Forget it, Pop. Even muffled by the cup, there was a shrill note in Dugan's voice. You don't have to. 4 steps will do it. Dugan moved 4 very small steps to the right. Ev raised the disc camera again, Father's Day present from Bryant and Marie, and clicked off the final 3 shots. Dugan was a very big man, and the ship in the earth reduced him to the size of a pygmy. Okay, Ev said. Dugan stepped quickly back to where he had been. He walked with mincing, tentative steps, looking at the great, round object as he went. Ev wondered if the pictures would turn out. His hands had been shaking, and the ship, for it certainly was some sort of spaceship, might be putting out radiation that would fog the film. Even if it doesn't come out, who's going to believe it? Even if it does come out, who's going to believe it? Who in the world, where kids go off to the movies every damn Saturday and see things like Star Wars? I want to get out of here, Dugan said. Ev looked at the ship a moment longer, wondering if David was in there, imprisoned. Wandering through unknowable corridors, or passing through doorways cut for no human shape. Starving in the darkness. No, if he was in there, he would have starved a long time ago. Starved and died of thirst. Then he slipped a small camera into his pants pocket, walked back to Dugan, and picked up the flare gun. All right, I guess. He broke off, looking in the direction of the Cherokee. There was a line of men and one woman standing in the trees, some armed. Ev recognized all of them, and none of them. 19. Bobbi started down the slope toward the 2 men. The others followed. Hello, Ev, Ev said, pleasantly enough. Dugan raised the .45, wishing bitterly for the familiar feel of his service .357. Stop, he said. He didn't like the way the gold cup muffled the word, robbed it of authority. He pulled the air mask down. All of you. Those of you with rifles, put 'em down. You're all under arrest. You're outgunned, Butch, Newt Barringer said pleasantly. Damn tootin', Beach growled. Dick Allison frowned at him. You better put the mask on again, Butch, Adley McKean said with a lazy, mocking smile. I think you're losing it. Butch had begun to feel woozy as soon as he pulled off the mask. Aaron, the steady whisper of their thoughts, made it worse. He pulled it up, wondering how much air could be left in the flat pack. Put it down, Bobbi said. And you put down the flare gun, Ev. No one wants to hurt you two. Where's David? Ev asked roughly. I want him, you bitch. He's on Altair 4 with Robbie the robot and Dr. Mobius, Hal Arkenberg said with a titter. He's picnicking amid the Krell memory banks. Shut up, Bobbi said. She suddenly felt confused, ashamed of herself, unsure. Bitch. Was that what the old man had called her? A bitch? She found herself wanting to tell him that he was confused. She wasn't a bitch. That was her sister Anne. A sudden, confused image came to her. The old man's distress, Gar's distress, even her own, all mingled. She was distracted. While she was, Ev Hillman raised the flare pistol and fired. If Dugan had done it, they would have read his intention before he could have acted. But the old man was different. There was a hollow thud and a whoosh. Beach Jernigan exploded into white flame, staggered backward, the .22 flying out of his hands. His eyes filmed, simmered, then burst as they filled with burning phosphorus. His cheeks began to run. He opened his mouth and began to claw at his chest as the superheated air he drew in expanded and ruptured his lungs. This all happened in the space of seconds. The line of men wavered and lost coherency as they stumbled backward, their faces blank with terror. They were hearing Beach Jernigan die inside their heads. "Come on," Ev shrieked at Dugan, and ran for the Cherokee. Judd Tarkington moved sluggishly to stop him. Ev swept the hot barrel of the flare gun across his face, branding his cheek and breaking his nose. Judd went flailing backward, stumbled over his own feet, and went sprawling. Beach was burning on the muddy, churned ground. Churned ground. He clawed weakly at his throat with one twisted, taunting hand. Hallowing hand. Shuddered, and then stilled. Dugan got moving, running after the old man, who was clawing at the driver's side door of the Cherokee. Bobbi heard Beach's thoughts fade away, wink out, and turned to see that the old man and the cop were on the verge of getting away. "Jesus Christ, you guys stop him!" That broke their paralysis, but Bobbi moved fast. She got to Ev and slammed the butt of the shotgun she was carrying onto the nape of the old man's neck. Ev's face whacked the top of the Jeep's door. Blood sprayed from his nose, and he dropped to his knees, dazed. Bobbi raised the shotgun butt to hit him again, but when Dugan, standing on the other side of the Cherokee, fired the old man's .45 through the passenger window, Bobbi felt a large, hot hammer suddenly slam her lower right shoulder. Her right arm was driven powerfully upward, and she lost her grip on the shotgun. The hammer numbed her flesh for a moment, and then the heat was back, an expanding furnace glow that was baking her from the inside out. She was thrown backward, her left hand going up the place the hammer had hit her, expecting to find blood, finding none, at least not yet, only a hole in her shirt and in the flesh underneath. The hole had hard edges that felt hot and throbbing. Blood was running down her back, a lot of it. Yeah, hold on. But shock, there you go, had numbed her. She felt little pain yet. Her left hand had found the small entrance wound. The exit wound was as big as a kid's fist. She saw Dick Allison, his face white and slack with panic. "Can you do me a favor? Can you pull out me some oatmeal?" Yeah, two's fine. She saw Dick Allison, his face white, slack with panic. "This isn't going right. Christ, not right at all. Get him before he gets us. Oh, you fucking Snoop. Don't shoot him," Bobbi screamed. Pain exploded through her. Blood flew from her mouth in a scrawny spray. The bullet had torn her right lung open. Allison hesitated. Before Dugan could raise his gun again, Newton Joe Summerfield had stepped in. Dugan turned toward them, and Newt clubbed the barrel of his rifle down on the head, holding the .45 as he did. Dugan's second shot went into the dirt. "Hold it, trooper. Hold it or you're dead," John Enders, the grammar school principal, screamed. "4 guns on you right now." Dugan looked around. He saw 4 men with rifles, and Allison, still wall-eyed, and only one small step from unglued, looked ready to shoot the moment a squirrel farted. "They'll kill you anyway. Might as well go out like John Wayne." They're all crazy. No, Bobbi said. She was leaning against the Jeep's hood now, blood trickling steadily from her mouth. The back of her shirt was soaking. We're not crazy. We're not going to kill you. Check me. Dugan probed clumsily toward Bobbi Anderson's mind and saw that she meant it. But there was a catch somewhere. Something he might have caught on to if he hadn't been so new to this eerie mind-reading trick. It was like the fine print in some slick car salesman contract. He would think about it later. These guys were amateurs, and there might still be a chance to get away clean if... Suddenly Adley McKean ripped the gas mask off his face, which felt a wave of dizziness almost at once. I like you better this way, Adley said. You won't think so much about escaping with your goddamn canned air turned off. Butch fought the dizziness and looked back at Bobbi Anderson. I think she's going to die. Think what you want. He straightened and took a step backward as that unexpected thought filled his head. He looked at her more closely. What about the old man? He said flatly. Not. Bobbi coughed, spraying more blood. Bubbles formed on her nostrils. Kyle and Newt started toward her. Bobbi waved them back. Not your business. You and me are going to get in front of the Jeep. You drive. In the front of the Jeep, you drive. There'll be 3 men with guns in the back, if you think of trying anything funny. I want to know what's going to happen to the old man, Butch repeated. Bobbi raised her gun with a great effort. She brushed her sweaty hair away from her eyes with her left hand. Her right dangled uselessly by her side. It was as if she wanted Dugan to see her very clearly, to measure her, which did. The coldness he saw in her eyes was real. I don't want to kill you, she said softly. You know that. But if you say one more word, I'll have these men execute you right here. We'll bury you next to Beach. Take our chances. Ev Hillman was struggling to his feet. He looked dazed, not sure where he was. He armed blood off his forehead like sweat. Another wave of dizziness washed through Butch, and a thought of infinite comfort came to him. This is a dream. All just a dream. Bobbi smiled without humor. Think that if you want, she said. Just get in the Jeep. Butch got in and slid across behind the wheel. Bobbi started around to the passenger side. She began coughing again, spraying blood, and her knees buckled. 2 of the others had to help her. Never mind to think. I know she's going to die. Bobbi turned her head and looked at him. A clear mental voice. Think what you want. Filled his head again. Archenberg, Summerfield, and McKean crammed into the back seat of the Cherokee. Drive, Bobbi whispered. Slow. Butch began to back up. He would see Everett Hillman once more, but would not remember. Later, most of Butch's mind would have been rubbed away like chalk from a blackboard. The old man stood in the sunlight, a stupendous saucer shape behind him. He was surrounded by big men. 5 feet to his left, there was something on the ground that looked like a charred log. You didn't do too bad, old man. In your day, you must have been quite a high rider. And you sure as hell weren't crazy. Hillman looked up and shrugged, as if to say, well, we tried. More dizziness. Butch's sight wavered. I'm not sure I can drive, he said. His voice seemed to boom into his ears from the great distance. That thing makes me sick. Is there any air left in that little kit, Adley? Bobbi whispered. Her face was ashy pale. The blood on her lips seemed very red by comparison. Face mask hissing a little. Put it on him. A moment after it was jammed firmly over Butch's mouth and nose again. He began to improve. Enjoy it while you can, Bobbi whispered, and then passed out. All right, so we are going to stop there, and I will talk to you guys this evening, okay? yeah, chapter 9 is very long, and they just start getting long like this. So we'll be lucky to get through a chapter each reading. All right. Anyway, love y'all. Don't forget to follow if you can, or if you want to keep up. And I will talk to you guys this evening. All right. Love you. Bye.